But if you don't do these things, you'll be exhausted lying on the couch, not being able to perform, and then the business will go under anyway. So I can do that because I've been there, right? I think that's a difference from others. I was the one who burned out. I built 6 companies at the time. One morning I couldn't get out of bed, right? I physically could not move. It was like I'd gotten a brain tumor, but I didn't. It was just stress.
Yep.
And so I've actually gotten out over the edge. So I know what happens to your system when that happens.
And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. We are super excited today. We have Peter Sorgenfrei here all the way from across the pond. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. You've got so much interesting topics to talk about around the idea of the more holistic leader in a company. And, a lot of people talk about sales. A lot of people talk about marketing. A lot of people talk about all the aspects of in the business, but part of being a leader is being able to be a whole person and having all those other aspects. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what does it really mean to be a leader?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So I think what it means to be a leader, it actually starts with being able to lead yourself. Oftentimes when we see professionals go out, they kind of lose themselves along the way, certainly as you go up through the ranks and become more and more senior in your career. And so one of the things I work with people on is to get back to what actually they enjoy doing and what made them great in the first place, and not getting caught up and lost in the stresses and the challenges of whatever job they're in.
And what do you find that is sort of there's probably a typical path that you see as people fall, they're starting to get into their rhythm. And then what are some of those indicators, some of those signs that things are starting to need to be looked at?
Most of the people that come to me are founders or CEOs of businesses that turn over north of $10 million and maybe 20 plus employees, right? So they're relatively small businesses. Largest clients have several hundred. But what happens is you start noticing that people let go of their boundaries and their barriers, right? All of a sudden, it's work all the time. And they forget their families, they forget their friends, they kind of forget their health, they forget a lot of things that they normally would cherish. So the first telltale sign is there are no barriers. It's all work all the time. The second one is they start changing personalities or behavior. So I think most of us have been around people who we've seen a change in, right? They become maybe more direct with us, less patient. They have a tendency to not remember things that we've talked about. Those kind of things are indicators that they've gotten out to a place where they don't really want to be.
And how does that then present itself from a family life, from a work life, in the results that you're seeing?
I just last week I had a client or a potential client call me, and he was like, I caught myself yelling at the kids again. I don't want to be doing that. Right. So for him, it was a sign that he was stressed out and bogged down, and he started treating his family in a way that he did not want to be a parent. So it's things like that that people discover, and then or somebody else tells them. I also have board members who call me and say, "Hey, we have a CEO here who is kind of treading water. We need you to go in and help prop him or her up, so that they don't break, so that they can continue to run the business and have happy and healthy lives."
So you actually have other people who are on the team who are saying, I think there's a red flag here. We need to have a chat.
Yeah, and it sometimes is a co-founder or an investor or board member, and it's interesting to me because I think I've been in business for 20 odd years now. I don't remember anybody kind of looking out for each other the same way, but it's happening now, and it's even happening in mid-sized businesses. So
Now, how does it when you that's an interesting scenario, I would think. The person who is then being called out on that they need help, does that person realize that they need help, or is that person in living in oblivion?
I think most people realize they need help. I think a lot of people are afraid of admitting it.
Mm.
Right. So what happens when I sit down with them, they can be a little bit apprehensive in the beginning. They can be a little bit defensive, like, why am I here? Why am I talking to you? You can't fix me. I'm fine. Leave me alone. Um, but through a very simple series of questions, I actually get them to realize that maybe they are not the person that they want to be, whether it be in private or professional life. And maybe it would behoove them to talk to somebody about it. And my approach is always, well, you don't really need to talk to me. You just need to talk to someone about what's going on in your life, and do you have somebody you can chat with? And so oftentimes people are like, yeah, I see there's a problem, but I don't know what to do about it. I'm like, great, well, let's start changing little things that will change how you feel about yourself and feel about what you're doing. And then over time, you'll see a major change happening.
So you start focusing on small wins, is that correct? And then start building off of those. And
Exactly right, right? If I don't know if you're a runner or not, but let's assume you weren't. You're not going to go out and run a marathon tomorrow, or you might. It's not going to be very pleasant. I'd rather, I'd show you what kind of running shoes to think about buying if you're starting your running journey, and then let's talk about that, and let's get that done, and then let's start going for long walks, so on and so forth. Same thing here. Um, then that's why I started with what is a good leader or what makes a leader. Well, it's somebody who leads themselves. And it starts with taking care of yourself in all the ways you need to in order to be the best professional human being you can be.
interesting. And one of the things I like is when you talk to at the beginning, and I think this is something that I have a firm belief in, is that people who ask for help have to understand it's not a give up moment. It's actually a commitment moment. It's saying that you are committed to your goals, you're committed to your results, and you're so committed, you're willing to ask for help. And I think that's something that's instrumental in being able to move forward in these scenarios. And really anyone.
True. And also, I think there's a large geographical difference, right? So I work all over the world. I have clients in 7 different countries on 3 different continents. And it's clear that in the part of the world where I live, Copenhagen, Denmark, Scandinavia, people are more ready, willing, and able to actually ask for help. But if you go into Latin America, for example, or even in North America, there's not a culture of somebody raising a hand and saying, hey, I feel weak, or I feel vulnerable, please help me. So there's still something culturally there that needs to be worked on. But when people do realize they need help and they come through the door, um, you know, the first thing I tell them is saying, I'm glad you're here. I'm here to help you in whichever way I can. Which way do you think it is? Right. So you basically also give them some ownership of the commitment that they've made. And they might say, you know what, I think I need to get a handle on my health. All right, let's start there. Or I think I need to get a handle on my relationship with my wife. All right, let's talk about that. So they kind of guide where we're going in the beginning. And of course, I discover there are other things that we need to work on, and we'll work on those in turn.
Yeah, the cultural differences. I think that's a really interesting point because you're covering a lot of different spots. And you say Scandinavia specifically is very open to the feedback loop. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it has to do something with our schooling, honestly. I mean, the kids here are very early on independent, right? They're being taught to be independent. When we moved back from the United States and my son went to kindergarten and learned how to, create a bonfire and was operating a saw on the first day, he was 5 at the time. We sent a video of
Wow.
that to my in-laws, right? And they're like, oh, my ex is American. So they're like, what's happening? So I think it's a long answer, but we create an independence in our kids and in our youth that allows them to have a greater sense of self earlier on. And
Hmm.
so they also understand when something is amiss, and they also understand that the only way to do something about it is to talk to someone about it, right? Whether it be a teacher at school or a parent or a friend or over time, a professional like myself.
Yeah, I wonder if if you use that as a base and you say, well, if they've learned to self-regulate when they're young, then they're also able to part of that self-regulation is to identify the issues. And if they don't have that sort of hierarchy that's on top of them oppressively telling them what they can and can't do all the time, then they don't have to fight against that. So they don't have to create that sort of rebellious element. And therefore they can, with confidence say, no, I'm good. I need help. And I wonder if that's a structure that happens.
I think it is, and I think actually there are corollaries in many other areas, right? So um, in Europe, we have a more relaxed relationship, for example, with alcohol or things like that. So people have a different. We don't have the same thing that happens in American colleges, where all of a sudden now you can drink alcohol, and then it kind of just goes out of a tangent because people have earlier on gotten a more balanced relationship with those kind of things. And I think it's the same thing as about emotional safety. You know, on the other hand, and maybe we're taking this in a different direction, when I returned to Denmark, I built a company here before I started doing what I'm doing now. And I had 70 employees, Danes primarily. They were all sort of relatively young, like 20 and 30s. One of the things that I had to get used to was they had an opinion about everything and they wanted to be heard on every issue. Mind you, I'd built building companies in the United States before that, and it was much more hierarchical, right? So all of a sudden, I had this group of people who were like, well, actually, boss, we think we should be doing this a different way. And so I had to kind of readjust my leadership style to dealing with a group of people who are much more independent and opinionated, because otherwise I couldn't govern that team. And I see the same thing with clients today. It's very different from if you're running a factory in Romania, as one of my clients is, or if you're building a fast-growing tech startup in California. Two completely different sets of problems arise.
And when you talk about the person in Romania, are they getting the same feedback loop that you were seeing in the organization, that the person in the factory floor is want to be heard, or is that more of a hierarchy system over
Romania
there?
is very much a hierarchy.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no question who's boss there. The juxtaposition is California and tech companies, right? So
Mm. And the tech company that you're seeing that structure there, the
I
feedback
and
in
the
America.
yeah, I see a much greater sense of transparency and participation in decision making,
Hmm.
and even greater than I saw on the East Coast of New York. So it's just kind of highlighting that there are pockets of the United States that resemble the Scandinavian leadership style, and of course there are pockets of Europe which are more hierarchical again.
Interesting. So when you're looking at the different styles and you're looking to help that leader, do you adapt your modality of response to the specific geography and the way that the people are in that geography, or do you sort of impart that Scandinavian mindset? Which sort of tangent do you take on that?
Actually, neither. What I do is I pay attention to the person in front of me, and
Hmm.
I try to really understand who they are as a professional human being.
Hmm.
How does Steve go to work? How does he carry himself? What are the things that matter to him personally? And therefore, how does that translate into his leadership style? And then I try to work essentially with that toolbox, right? Because it would be impossible for me to know the cultural nuances of a client in Colombia versus somebody in Sweden. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I really just use what I have in front of me and try to get the best out of that with them. I often say to clients, I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm actually just going to let you trust the answers within. Because in most
Hmm.
cases, they know what they need to do, but they're not doing it for a variety of reasons. And those are the ones we need to get out of the way.
Yeah, that's very much a good coaching mentality, is that you pull it out of them, not dump it into them.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. Now, if you were going to say to someone to avoid getting to the point that they're starting to see those issues happen, what are some of the things they can preemptively do? I like prehab rather than rehab.
Yep.
So, what are some things that people can kind of do to start to build in that resiliency in the beginning?
Well, I think it's about having healthy habits with yourself. And that's not just around diet and exercise and sleep, which are the three big ones that we typically talk about, but it's also mental habits. It's around understanding that you can and should spend time on other stuff than building your career. I think when we're early in our careers, we kind of work really hard and want to prove ourselves, and that's healthy too. but having an early balance and saying, no, but I'm, in addition to being an analyst at an investment bank, I'm also a painter, or I still want to keep playing piano because, or whatever, right? So I think having healthy habits with yourself is one. The other one is to have somebody in your life who tells you when you're out of line. And sometimes it can be our partners, our romantic partners. Sometimes it's a good friend, but having somebody who tells you, you know what, Steve, you're becoming a little bit of an asshole now, right? I mean, can I say that on your podcast? Maybe I can't. Um, that somebody actually keeps you in checks and balances, right? And I think most of us have friendships, but most of us are also different with our friends than we are in the work environment. So it's helpful to have somebody who's connected to you work-wise, who says, hey, it feels like you've lost your grip a little bit recently. Are you okay? Is there something you want to talk about? That would be a good idea.
So having the framework of people that you can rely on, that there's sort of that has a trust factor that you can say honestly and take that honest feedback and say you're not where you need to be. And now, if you're in that situation where you're starting to block those people out, how do you ensure that that still happens? Is that something that because I could see a cycle happen there.
Yeah, no, I know exactly where you're going, because actually, if you're on this path as a leader, you start not listening, right?
Mm.
Or you stop listening. It's more correct. And so, who's going to get you out of that? And this comes back to the responsibility around the professionals around you. So, one thing we see a lot is we have a founder CEO who is, he's over the edge already. And I always ask the board, I'm like, where were you guys? Right? The board has a responsibility to understand if the leadership team is not performing for a variety of reasons. Is there a feedback loop in the organization so that when people start seeing Peter behaving a way that's counter to building the kind of culture that we want, how come nobody stepped in from the board, for example? How come nobody stepped in from the leadership team? So if I'm the CEO and my CFO or CTO, CMO start experiencing me becoming less effective because of I'm getting to that point. Do we not have a culture of where they could speak up and sit me down and saying, okay, the three of us have been talking, Peter. You're no longer the pleasant go get him kind of guy that you used to be. We want to make sure you're okay. Is there something we can do differently in how we run the company? People have been told when they come to me, others in the business have told them. And it's only when they kind of been forced to, in some cases, that they end up speaking to me or somebody else.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times when you kind of get into the thick of it, and if the business is going through a challenge, you're going to double down on the business to try to solve that business problem. How do you see that sort of playing out where, the person saying, well, that sounds all great, but I've got to hit my numbers, or I've got to get this project done, or I've got to get this growth initiative happening. What you're talking about is so secondary to what my goals are.
That's true, but you won't be able to achieve those goals if you're not able to work in the business. Um, Only 4 or 5 months ago, I had a company that was heading towards bankruptcy, and the CEO, who happened to be a female, a CEO, she's like, "Well, I can't stop to take out time for myself. Besides my family and the business, I got to turn the ship around." And in this case, she was working with me, obviously, and I said, "Well, that's all good and well, but you're not going to be here in 3 months if you don't take care of this, right?" I'm not talking about her passing away, but you're not going to be able to go out and raise that round of capital that you need or do the restructuring that you need to do because you won't have the mental fortitude. So you have to trust me that when I tell you now, you need to start taking some time to do these things that I'm prescribing for you. And then we will build it back up and you will be able to save your business. But if you don't do these things, you'll be exhausted lying on the couch, not being able to perform, and then the business will go under anyway. So I can do that because I've been there, right? I think that's a difference from others. I was the one who burned out. I built 6 companies at the time. One morning I couldn't get out of bed. right? I physically could not move. It was like I'd gotten a brain tumor, but I didn't. It was just stress.
Yep.
And so I've actually gotten out over the edge. So I know what happens to your system when that happens. And when I tell my story to the founder CEOs that come through the door, they all nod like, yeah, I remember that feeling, or I've been close to that, or oh, you're talking about being forgetful. That's happening to me now. Or you're talking about being short with your loved ones. That's happening. Um, so they trust that I know what I'm talking about versus maybe they're even their general practitioner, right, who hasn't gone through the experience. He or she may also have told them to slow down, but they don't know what they're talking about because they never built a startup. They don't know what it's like. Well, I do. And so I think that's why they listen.
So when you said there was that moment that you were in the bed and could not get up, and what were the steps that you took to solve that? What specifically?
Well, I didn't take any steps. My sister took steps because I didn't know what to do. I'd never done this before. My sister happens to be a psychologist and an expert on stress-reduced incapacitation, which was what happened to me. So total dumb luck. But essentially, what happened, the first thing was they shut me out of everything in the business. I didn't get any Slack messages, emails, phone calls, whatever. There was one person that contacted me from the company if there was anything, and that was my head of HR. The second thing that happened was I started working with somebody like me now who gave me 4 things to do every day, and only those 4. I could only sleep, eat healthy stuff, go for walks, and not talk to too many people. The last one was a little undefined, right? So I did that for basically for 6 weeks. And my brain came back and I started thinking clearly again, I thought. I went back to work. My brain still did not compute what was happening. I didn't, I didn't know where I was half the time. And so I was out on sick leave another 6 weeks. And then eventually I was fired by my board because they needed a CEO who could take the company further.
And so then from you leaving that and saying that did not work then at that time is what you're saying.
Yeah, I did not get healthy enough fast enough for the board to allow me to come back to the business.
So what is a mechanism to get healthy fast enough so that you don't see that resolution happening?
Catch it before it happens.
Preemptive.
Preemptive.
Yeah.
Changing
Yeah.
your habits, changing your lifestyle, changing your mental models around what you need to do earlier.
Yeah.
I was lucky in the sense that the doctors told me if it hadn't happened, I could have had more sort of long-term cognitive damage.
Yeah.
I didn't. I'm totally fine, thankful. But I wish that we had caught it, 6 months earlier, 9 months earlier, then maybe I could have gotten back to the team that I had hired and loved and wanted to continue to work with.
Yeah, I always think the idea that prehab, and it goes back to this whole where the starting was, is that prehab work is that I think this is a challenge with, I mean, a lot of things that we see in medical, where it's always we have to wait till the problem happens,
Mhm.
and then we're going to solve the problem,
Yeah.
rather than doing all the work at the beginning so that you actually completely avoid the problem.
And it's not a lot you need to do,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we all know that we need to sleep 6, 7, 8 hours a night or different cycles. We can talk about sleep some other day if you want, because that's one of my favorite topics. We all know that we need to get 30 to 60 minutes of movement into our day. We all know all this stuff, but we don't do it, right? We scroll Instagram until midnight and sleep for 4 hours and then wake up groggy. um, but if we start doing those things, and the thing I started doing, I started going into the ocean every morning. I live near the ocean, and so I jump in the water every single day, which has completely changed my life mentally and physically. I
Now,
meditate
is
now.
that a cold ocean or is that a
Yeah,
warm
yeah,
ocean?
yeah, yeah. It's freezing. It's freezing. But I
So you do
love
the
it.
cold
I mean,
plunge.
it's
Yeah.
like if I don't do it, because there are occasions when I travel to places where I can't do it, right? And when I don't do it, I can feel it, and the people around me can feel like he's not quite himself, right?
Mm.
Um, I started meditating, which I felt was this new age stuff. But again, 5, 10 minutes of meditation every single day completely changes your mental game. And those
Yeah.
are the few things that I try to get my clients to do. And I have a private equity owner right now, a private equity CEO. And when I told him he was going to meditate, he kind of looked at me like, this is the biggest mistake I've made in my life hiring this guy. But now he's doing it. And I get these WhatsApp messages from him and like, oh, I just had the greatest 11 minutes. I was just, in my perfect spot. I'm like, who is this guy? But it changes your mentality. And so those are some of the things you can do. I write about this stuff on LinkedIn a ton and give off tips there as well for the listeners if they want to get caught up.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think everybody's going to have their own way of handling it. I love the cold plunge. I think the cold plunge that is just a thing of beauty. I have a swim spa in my backyard, and we're building out a cold plunge. So then we're going to have that because I love the Nordic spas. They're just, to me, one of the best things that anybody possibly can do.
Yep.
And the cold plunge, especially. And so I think that's great. And then meditation, when I think about meditation, I think if meditation was almost given a different word, such as like focused thinking or not focused thinking, it was
Mhm.
almost like the name itself is the issue because people think it's like a bunch of hippies getting together and eating some
Mhm.
mushrooms or something. And rather than, something that's actually going to produce something of meaning. And I always wonder that it's got it has bad branding sometimes.
I could not agree more. And so one of the things I talk about is saying, well, when you describe what it is, right? We've described, hey, sitting by yourself and observing your thoughts, or observing a tree. I record these meditations for clients. I have one where you sit and observe a tree for 20 minutes, right? Or observe your hand for 5 minutes. And the way I then describe it is saying, actually, it's just about being present with what you're doing. You can meditate while you're eating a grape, right? Then people start understanding it's not actually about the hippie stuff, but it's about allowing your mind, to your point, to be focused, to be calm, to be relaxed. And that's a feeling everybody wants. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you look at it, I mean, for me, I know that I love movement. I think movement is extremely important. How much do you see that that's something that's lacking in people's lives in the idea of just getting in tune with their physicality? And you see
so,
that's a
so,
regional issue.
maybe, so you said you loved what? It was falling
So
out for a second.
movement. So my thing, I love Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I
Yep.
think getting out and being physical is extremely important.
Yep.
What do you see that is something that's lacking quite a bit?
Well, yes and no. I think there's been a little bit of a dangerous trend that movement meant ultra marathons, or kind of extreme-ish sports that has high adrenaline levels, or nothing, right? There's not really
Hmm.
been the in between. And so, to me, movement is extremely important, but um, it doesn't have to be extreme. So it can be 30 minutes every day, just making sure that you move around, go for a walk, whatever. The 10,000 steps everybody talks about. Um, I like these micro doses of movement. So right before you and I had a call, I did the plank for 2 minutes. That's all I can do, right? I'm not in very good shape. Um, but things like that, just to make sure to remind yourself, it does two things. One, you get some physicality into your day, which is important. Two, it gives your mind again a chance to be like, all right, I'm going to be doing something else than looking into a screen and worrying about a sales forecast or worrying about an acquisition or whatever it is. um, and three, it gives you variety, which most of us also enjoy. In Denmark, in Europe, the vast majority of people live an active lifestyle. uh, they go to one or two or three organized sports during the week, whether it be, badminton, which I always bring up with Americans because you guys think that's funny because it's a long game, right? Um, but they go to some organized sports, and so that's the fourth and final benefit, which is the social aspect of it. It's different if you have a group of friends that you go and play paddle with than it is that you go to lunch with them, right? Something changes in your interactions, you get some exercise, you get the endorphins going, and it's different than the usual talking that you might be doing in your professional life. So that's why it's helpful.
Yeah, I think the idea of organized sports, I think, is so crucial, and I see this happening. I live in Canada, and a lot of the high schools right now have really started to diminish the focus on organized sports.
Yeah.
We saw that my son's school, they don't have a football team
Hmm.
anymore. They don't have a rugby team anymore. They don't have a wrestling team. They don't have, just all these sports are falling by the wayside. And the organization of that sport and the social element that they get out of that sport and be able to, focus on things that not just, the stuff that they learn in class. I think it's a detriment to the environment. I think they need to really focus in back on bringing, those things to be the forefront. And these last few years of the lockdowns and that sort of thing really pushed people away from those things as being extremely important.
And it teaches you social skills, right? It teaches you
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of things that you cannot learn just by sitting behind a screen or doing other things like that. It's going to be a mistake. I'm sure Canada, and if the United States is heading this way too, is going to wake up in 10 years and be like, hmm, we missed the boat on that one. We should have actually encouraged people to do organized sport in the schooling system, because right now we then have, or in the future, you'll have a bunch of individuals who don't really have those skills, don't have the physicality. More
Yep.
and more people are getting obese, both in your part of the world and in our part of the world. And that's going to bring with it a whole host of social issues and financial issues for the countries affected by that.
Well, I think we're seeing a swing back, hopefully, against that. There's been a heavy swing endorsing that as a lifestyle,
Hmm.
and I think we're seeing a pushback on that, and a pushback where it's actually being accepted. That
Okay.
at least I feel it. I don't know what you're feeling on that side of the pond.
Yeah, the only stat I have is surprisingly 1/3 of Danes are now overweight.
Hmm.
So and it used to be, maybe 15% or something. Um, so the diets have changed, and then people have become much more sedentary as well.
Interesting. Interesting. So, if we were going to leave the listeners with one final thought about, we've talked about focus, we've talked about solving the problem before it happens, we talked about movement, we talked about meditation, we talked about having a sphere of people that can actually reach out to you and ensure that they're there to support you and say, hey, you know what, we're raising our hand for you because you need some help. Is there anything else that we should leave with them that they need to think about as being a leader to know that they can get things resolved?
I encourage everybody to explore their vulnerability, right? So find ways to open up yourself to others about the things that you're insecure about or uncertain about when it comes to your leadership, not just the tactical stuff, but also the emotional stuff. Who am I in this role? How am I doing this role? I actually have some questions about that. Find somebody to talk to about that. Not because you need to be fixed, but it might be that you could be supported in ways that you didn't imagine that will make your professional life better.
I love it. I love it. I think that the mindset I was, let's fix it as a leader. Let's get it resolved. But I like that it's not necessarily about being fixed.
Well, you never, I don't know if you ski or other things like that, right? But you never become a perfect skier. You could always use a coach on the side or practice. And the same thing with leadership, right? There's nobody who's done learning being a
Yeah.
leader ever.
Yeah.
So find ways to sort of tweak that along the way, and you'll be better for it.
I love it. I love it. Well, Peter, it's been an absolutely amazing chat, and it's one of those things where you put some of these things in nuggets. As a person who runs a company, you're like, okay, yep, okay. Thank you
Mhm.
very much for all of the input. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me. I enjoyed it.
And guys, if you need if you'd like to reach out to Peter, he is on LinkedIn, and it's Peter Sorgenfrei, and the link will be in the show notes. And guys, thank you very much for joining us on the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. We'll see you on the next one.